is a relatively small city for what is actually a major financial center. How does Frankfurt manage to punch above its weight in that regard? And where would you place Frankfurt in the league of international financial centers? Where is its niche?
I think the beauty of the beast is manifold. One is very clearly a financial center has a great advantage if it's backed up by a big real economy. And in contrast to some other countries and some other financial centers, we have a big economy. And as Peter mentioned initially too, we are at the same time the gateway towards Eastern Europe, a growth area, which let us down a little bit now, but ultimately will continue to be a growth area. So I think this mixture of a good banking system at home and a real economy that's really backing up this banking system is a combination that's hard to beat. I think the second aspect is probably the German banks have always been and been forced by their clients to be domestic and international. They were the inventors of correspondent banking in the old days. They accompanied their clients to all parts of the world. And where they couldn't furnish it, there was ample room because the market is free and easy to access also for foreigners, that we as foreign banks, for instance, settled in and provided services the German banks initially didn't provide, or we provided it in a different way. And I think if you really look at it, what's the secret of the place? To some degree, it's what I think was alluded to by all of my colleagues. Frankfurt is a very open society. It's open to foreigners. It has by far the largest content of non-Germans living in Frankfurt. About 30% of the population in Frankfurt is non-German. And you will be surprised how many Germans living in Frankfurt have been living outside of Frankfurt and have been living outside of Germany. So it's an open society which has great historical roots. All the old German emperors were crowned and installed in Frankfurt because that was one of the few places which was a neutral territory, free to access, free to come there, and free to also leave without being caught or hanged. So the tradition is an open spirit. And I think lastly, to go back to, you were asking about the government role in this whole thing. The spirit of Frankfurt is a mixture of, yes, government, hopefully productive, and it was productive, as mentioned in the case, for instance, of our factories, knowledge factories, so to speak. But I think the important point is that there was always and is always a cooperation between government setting the framework, but private initiative, private enterprise, private individuals kind of stepping in and initiating a lot of things. Joint ventures on the university side, joint ventures on museums. The Frankfurt Opera is one of the best German-speaking operas for a number of years now. So it's a great combination of private initiative and government frame setting, so nobody is dominating the other.
Right, there's a balance that must be struck there.
Yeah.
What kind of support do you look to the government for your particular companies? What support would you like to see to help you grow, and is it there in adequate measure?
Well, in our industry, I must say this is a fairly, from the consumer perspective, it's an established industry. From the content provider perspective, it's a fairly young industry. And I think the total amount of people working in our industry, German-wide, are probably 6,000. It's really not much, actually. And the education system is a little bit behind because of it's just became established or established just now. What we try to do is, within dialogue with universities, and provide them with our technology and tools to use them for educational purposes. And we have, I think, a relationship with over 27 universities across Germany, which are using our technologies and tools to educate students in various areas, not necessarily just in games areas, or sometimes in visualization, sometimes in simulation, as well as training. And I think the government discovered that this industry is a very big industry in terms of revenues already. I mean, it's bigger than the movie industry worldwide, but it's also innovation industry which creates innovations, which creates workspace, which creates basically, which is a motor for upcoming technology which will be used, established out of the game industry, but used in multiple other industries, such as architects are using our technology, as an example, which you have noted. I mean, which no architect would think 10 years ago that they're using technologies developed out of game industry. Car manufacturers, aerospace manufacturers are using our technology for visualization. That all became suddenly public and known, and suddenly that becomes industry which offers actually a huge level of innovation, and has actually also is a magnet for people stay in Germany when they want to be creative in the entertainment industry, and that helps actually to position it accordingly and backing up with passes to education. Right. That was missing, I would say, 10 years ago. It's coming now step by step.
There is a good balance, I must say. First of all, if the government could make sure that it stays as stable as it is so far, I wouldn't be too unsatisfied, to be honest. I really personally like to work in a country where infrastructure works very well, and is particularly important for our business. Things like power availability at a decent price, as well as telecommunications availability and availability of resources is important, and it works in Germany, generally speaking. If I could think of anything that I'd like to see improved is actually the mentality, the way of thinking about these innovative industries. As Afni mentioned before, is it really in the mindset of all the decision makers, actually not only political decision makers, but also decision makers in the economy, that this is the future, this is an important market, important business for all verticals, all vertical industries in the future? Is that really in everyone's mind? I'm not exactly sure. But other than that, keep the infrastructure stable, and I think that's enough.
Do you think, in your experience in dealing with the government bodies that have some sway in what sectors are prioritized, is there a forward vision in terms of the high-tech sectors and what digital infrastructure needs to be there and the technologies of tomorrow?
Definitely. Frankfurt overcame the telecom monopoly 2.5 years before everybody else in our country, and that was with strong support of the city government. I was at that time in charge of the Frankfurt Economic Development Corporation, and we supported the deputy mayor who was in charge of that very much, and they opened their spare pipes in the ground so that the companies like Colt and MFS at that time, they could bring in their cables in existing pipes. The funny thing about that, I love these new terms that then suddenly are generated because we found out there was too many companies suddenly who wanted to do that. The city urged them to come up with so-called joint digging agreements. So they put their cables into the ground jointly, and this picture for me is still striking. I see the CEOs jointly digging in our streets, but that's how it all came about. And international surveys always tell us that there is no other city in the world with so many competing glass fiber networks than Frankfurt. So that really means state-of-the-art technology and absolutely competitive prices. So that's really a big advantage for us. Maybe I could add one other thing. We're always talking about the city of Frankfurt and how small it is, but we're not talking about the city of Frankfurt as such. It's the core and it's the center of the city, of the region, but we're talking about a region of about 5.5 million people. So that is far larger than what we really talked about. We're just talking about Frankfurt. There are cities like Darmstadt with this wonderful technical university that is known around the world. There is Wiesbaden, our capital. There are other cities with long traditions and specialities. For the investor, for the companies coming to our region, has the great advantage that there is some competition in the region, because the county presidents or managers or the mayors, the different mayors, they all compete with each other. So they have easy access to the politicians who really can make decisions, and there is a competition, and the one who offers the best service and is the fastest on his feet will win. And this is something that is, I think, to a great advantage of our region.
On that note, how much flexibility is there to offer investment incentives? Because in the EU legislation, there's some rules regarding what can be offered and what can't be offered in terms of tax exemptions. How much authority does, say, the city and the region have?
Well, we are very, very successful. We have low transaction costs. That's why is everybody there, and that's why we can't give incentives, and we don't give incentives. This is something I never understand with the international community, and I think the US spoiled the market to some extent, that people don't realize that they are on the receiving side only once. After that, they are generating with their own tax they have to pay the incentives their competition will be getting from the same people. The other thing is that people don't realize that's always the company who's liable for that. As a government, I can give as much money as I want. The receiver is liable to the EU, and every single citizen can make it known, let it make a remark to the Commission about somebody getting unwarranted subsidies, and then they have to pay back on a very short notice. So
and the political tide can.
yeah,
can
I think
turn.
we are wise to invest in infrastructure and all of that, and don't incentives always are the wrong signals for the business community. I mean, the money that has been wasted during the IT bubble, it's incredible. Nothing came out of it.
Would you all agree with this assessment? How important is it the fundamentals long-term of the location versus any kind of immediate fiscal incentives that could be garnered?
I would disagree a little bit in a small area, which is the integrative industry, but because here that can help really a lot actually. So, I mean, there is something called prototype financing, such kind of things. So small incentives actually, which can establish startups or which can help startups actually prototyping certain technologies, certain content, which can then be commercialized through larger partners. That is missing in Germany actually. Or not Germany, yeah, that's missing, not entirely in Germany, but in some areas. But that's all accountable for a fairly small industry, which a game industry is. I mean, across other industries, I think it's very well established, and infrastructure is there. From our part of view, it's not necessarily competitive to our neighbors.
I mean, that's why the EU does allow subsidies for startups and things like that. So,
but if I look,
development of new technologies.
If I look, however, in this picture to Frankfurt again, and there are organizations like Game Area, Rhine-Main, or private incentives, people who are really understanding and pushing this. There are open dialogues with politicians going on. They try to understand, because it's a new market. It's a new type of offering, basically, and there's a huge willingness there to change things. And I'm sure that very shortly this will be actually equally competitive to across Europe, actually. So I don't think that this will be a long-term disadvantage. It's just new, but it's growing and it gets a lot of attention. And Germans want to do it right, so they are taking more time to analyze certain things. But I think what will pull it off, I'm sure about this, will work out very well, actually.